is that, I'm not Dateline, and yeah, some of this but I'm not Dateline, so I'm not in this with some agenda. You're not going to come, you're not going to come see this final thing, and there's going to be, horrible John Williams music playing over this thing and talking about the dark.
I don't want to do this then.
That's all right. Yeah. But anyway, part of that representation is, remember, the way that I have retrieved people for this documentary was I got myself slashdotted, and then a few people who were relatively, important people,
tracked you down, I found.
Tracked me down, and then sometimes there have been people who I call Rosetta Stones. Mm-hmm. Like the minute they took an interest. The guy who did I have a documentary on DJ scratching.
Okay.
And he was having trouble getting people. A lot of DJs didn't want to talk to him, and another thing. And then DJ Qbert found out about it and interviewed with him. Mm-hmm. And then he would get phone calls from these guys he'd been trying to get for months, going, "Yeah, Qbert told me to talk to you." And I've gotten a few guys like that.
Well, I've done that sort of in my travels. I've gone and I've hunted down people, and I've spent years finding, this one particular person who I felt was going to be the absolute key to finding out more about a particular project within Atari.
Right.
And then I would find that person, we'd talk, and you kind of get this sense from him or her that they really weren't terribly interested, they weren't into it, they were happy to help me out, but really didn't care. Right. But then all of a sudden, a couple months down the road, hey, listen, Steve sent me your way, or Joe sent me your way, and I'd start getting emails and phone calls, and someone would go, listen, I almost did this twice, it was going to go out in the trash, if you want it, you pay the shipping on it, I'll ship it to you, and then I get this box of stuff, and it's like memos and notes and photographs, and it's like, God, here's a time capsule which I've just opened up, and then I'm able to take it, scan it, and document it, and then put it up on the website, and then publish it so people can read about it, and that's kind of expanded over the last couple of years.
Right. So you should turn this on, I guess, for this, or which. When you say turn on, you mean?
Well, I was going to turn on the whole entire thing. No, the system actually. This is just set up right now. I've been doing most of my work on the workbench here.
We'll turn it on. It seems like a cool.
Let me just throw the. Where did I put the extension cord?
Don't even try. But actually, let me pause. Wherever the subjects may lead.
All right.
But like I was saying,
I'll probably just babble, and then hopefully you'll get a good amount of meat out of it. I mean, I can talk about how I first, discovered bulletin boards, and then talk a little bit about, the whole Atari involvement and what it took for me to actually, like for instance, get my bulletin board up and running. Right. The sort of discovery path, because, see, what happened was, I was hoping I'm pretty sure, where is it? I have a disc here. I'm pretty sure one of these discs is the original disc that a friend of mine gave me. I was over his house, and this was sort of at a time where, actually here it is. This was sort of a time where, pirating was major mondo. Actually, I have the disc. And we were constantly going back and forth trading games and stuff, and I was just starting to really get into, online computing. I mean, I had got my CompuServe account, not knowing how much it was going to cost at the time. And that only lasted for a couple of months because I couldn't afford it anymore after that. And I was on CompuServe, and I was downloading files. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And I was going on the other chat rooms and finding other Atari people, and I was like, wow. I was like, there are other people out there, and connecting and finding each other. And I remember one local person in Staten Island where I used to live, and he had a disc full of stuff, and one of them was this disc called Carnival BBS. And I was like, what's this? He goes, I really don't know. So I was like, well, make a copy of it. I want it. And I went home, and I started to look at the code. And I'm looking at all these calls to the disk drive. I'm looking at these calls to the modem. And I'm looking at all these loops and stuff, and I'm like, what is this? And at the time, I didn't have... you had the Atari, and you had... It was kind of interesting, was that on the Ataris, you had this one port on the side here. Don't mind the thing hanging down here. This is my 80-column video update. But there was this one port here on the side, and this was called the SIO port. And the neat thing about this, and what a lot of people really didn't realize, was Atari really introduced the first consumer PC. And they made this big, humongous cable that I don't care how old you are, who you are, whether you're a computer person or an auto mechanic, you could figure out how to stick this thing in the side of the machine and hook up your disk drives and your printers and everything like that. And the real neat thing about this interface was it was invented by the guy that now holds one of the patents for the universal serial bus. So I think that's kind of a neat irony. Well, while this is the only way to talk out of the computer for the most part to peripherals, but what you had to have was this nifty neat little device here. And this was sort of a godsend to Atari users. This was the 850 interface, and what this really is, this is the eyes and the ears for any Atari computer, because you've got a parallel port on the side of it, and you had 4 serial ports on here, and this gave you the ability to, you know, reach out and touch everybody in the world from your Atari computer. I didn't have one of these yet, and took a little while, took a couple months before I could finally, you know, save up that newspaper route money before I could pick one up, and I finally got that. And the bulletin board program finally came up, but then I started to run into all these other errors. But it was running. So now I was able to look at it, and I was able to analyze it. And with a little playing around and wiring one interface port to another one and doing a little loop back, I was able to get it to talk to itself. I was able to look at it, and I was able to start interacting with it. And I was like, my God, I was like, you can remotely control the computer. Somebody can come on this computer and they can look at the disk drives and they can print to the printer and they can do all these nifty neat things. And that was sort of my my launching point, where I was like, wow, I was like, this is it. I want to learn everything I can about it. And what I'm keep holding here is like websites today. You can go online, you can cut and paste some words into it, throw a couple pictures up on it, boom, it's up on a server. Hey, you're done. I got a website. I'm a webmaster. Wow, this is great. You know, I feel proud. Well, when you wanted to be a sysop, when you wanted to be a system operator, you had to know everything. You had to know every single pinout on every single port on it. You had to know all the timing. You had to know every single error code that would come up on the system. You had to know why that error code happened. You had to know either BASIC or assembly or machine language, whatever you decided you were going to do your website in. And, you know, that made it a challenge. You really had to get into the machine. You really had to enjoy it. And despite what a lot of people may think about Atari users, they always think, oh, those guys just, you know, they like to play games. Yeah, we like to play games, but we also really like to learn a lot about the machines. And I think Atari users, my own personal point of view, was we were really good hardware hackers. We were really good software hackers. And there were a lot of people out there that really went out of their way to learn the machine inside and out. One of the things that came out of Atari BBSs was something called a ASCII. And that was Atari's version of ASCII. And basically what it was it was an extended character set. And it gave you the opportunity to do animations and to do graphics. And the fun part about it was that with bulletin boards, you're dealing with text. Now you look at websites. What made the web most popular? Well, it was graphics. You know, web's been around for decades, but it was always text. Once you had graphics involved, all of a sudden the web became snazzy. It became something you want to go to. And you look at websites today, and you look at, you know, how flashy they are with animation and audio and whatever that happens to be. That's what draws you to the website. Well, the same thing happened with bulletin boards. Bulletin boards were becoming very, very run-of-the-mill. You had Forum for Ataris, you had RBBS on the PCs, and you had, you know, the Cocos and the Commodore 64s. And what was happening was a lot of people were getting bulletin board software. It kind of, in a few years, it kind of evolved from everybody sort of hacking their own together, where you had Amos for the Atari, which, you know, brought on Forum and brought on Carnival and brought on, you know, probably a half a dozen other different flavors. And people were starting to put them up, and it was becoming canned. It was just the same basic menu, the same basic selections, and, you know, oh, you've seen one, you've seen them all. And that was what was happening. A lot of people would come to the BBSs, but they weren't participating in it because it was like, it's the same old thing. I could go over to my other friend's, you know, bulletin board, and I'd rather participate over there because it's the same looking board as this one. So why should I keep, you know, coming over here? What was happening with the Ataris was we evolved into looking for a carriage return that was an ASCII carriage return. So instead of the standard carriage return, you would hit one that was 92 points higher, and that would indicate, okay, you're now in ASCII mode. Everything I deliver to you now is ASCII menus. And we would have all these really cool, you know, menus with cool decorations and borders around them, and maybe this particular one line would be inverted, the other line would be regular, another one would be inverted. Just kind of trying to spice it up a little bit, make it a little different. But what really started to get interesting, and this was sort of this neat, friendly competition, was we were all starting to work on doing animation. And in fact, one or two programmers actually wrote ASCII animation programs, so you could work offline, you could edit your whole video sequence and save it as your file, and then put it up onto your bulletin board, and then you could let people run it. Now, I ran from early 86, I think it was January 86 until late 88, early 89. Actually, no, it was from 86 to about 88 or so. I ran a bulletin board called the Star Trek BBS in New York. And one of the neat things I had was I would have a side view of the Enterprise come across the screen, it would stop, and then you would see the back section of the Enterprise where the shuttle bay was. And the shuttle bay doors would open up, and remember, this is a ASCII. This is all blocky graphics, 40-column graphics by 24, nothing fancy, nothing high res. I mean, you probably could have gotten something better on an Atari video computer system, or a home system a home video game than you would have gotten online. And of course, we're also dealing with 300 baud, 1200 baud. The little shuttle bay would open, and you would have a little shuttlecraft that would come, and it would go inside the shuttle bay, and it would say, "Welcome to the Star Trek BBS. You're clear for docking." And then it would hit, it would say, "Press enter to continue." And then you would go into the main menu. And I also had a game at one point with Star Trek 3. You had to steal the Enterprise and get it out of the space station before the doors closed. So I had this little game. It was mostly numbers, but then I tried to get fancy with it. And if you didn't put the code in right, you had 10 seconds left, and you'd see the picture of the door going a little bit, closer and closer together. It was cheesy little games like that. You did whatever you could with, limited memory. This actually is my original Atari 800 that I ran my bulletin board on. It's obviously it's seen much better years. I did a couple of modifications on it. One before was I added 80-column output on it so that I could, I could compete with other 80-column bulletin boards. I could actually format my text and allow people to see it in an 80-column format or a 40-column format. One of the most interesting and annoying things about bulletin boards was the fact that if you wanted to see if the system operator was around. Now, the system operators, they were kind of regarded as, not gods, but, we were regarded as, wow, if you actually know the sysop, hey, I actually know Jim, he's the sysop of, such and such BBS. All of a sudden, you sort of raised up in clout, hey, I'm good friends with the sysop. Well, people would always want to talk to the sysop, so what they would do is they'd always press Control-G. And they'd always ring the bell on the console. And, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I got to get up for, class. I was going to college at the time, and, I can't stay up all night talking to people on the BBS. So what I ended up doing was, there's an internal speaker in the 800. I found a key mech. I don't remember. I think it's an Apple II key mech, if I remember correctly. And I hacked it into the case here. So I could just shut the bell off at night, so people would leave me alone. That was like one little hack I did, and then later on I had done all sorts of modifications and upgrades to the computer. One of the biggest problems was speed. In the beginning I was using Atari 810 disk drives, and the 810 disk drives, this is 90K. That was it, and that could barely keep all my message board. So what I ended up doing was, at one point, I ended up adding in a 256K RAM disk, and I kept all of my menus and everything in the RAM disks. And what I ended up doing later on is I got a little fancy with my programming. I would keep the first 5 or 10 recent messages in the RAM disk, so when people went to go access them, it would immediately come up. You wouldn't get that delay. In today's high-speed broadband age, someone hits enter, you notice a lot of times websites may take a little while to respond to your request and send a web page to you. The same thing with bulletin boards. You were dealing with the fact that a lot of people were going from 300 baud to 1200 baud, and we suddenly got up to 2400 baud, and that was just amazing to get up to that. And then if you had $1,000 or $2,000, you might be able to afford a 9600 baud modem, which would still having problems, and the phone company was, yelling up and down, and all sorts of magazine articles saying that the phone lines can't handle that. There's too much noise. You'll never see above 9600 baud ever, in your lifetime. But anything you could do to cut down the lag, you tried to do. So you wouldn't have somebody hitting enter, waiting 3 or 4 seconds, because with the Ataris, admittedly, I mean, it was not an IBM PC. It couldn't hold, 360K, and then later on, you had 1.2 meg diskettes, and then of course 10 meg hard drives. You were dealing with just a standard 88K disk drive, and then maybe you got fancy. You went with the third-party disk drives. You can hold 180K. I did later on luck out. I wound up getting myself a Corvus hard drive. A Corvus in the early 80s was, the big networking company. Everybody had a Corvus hard drive if they wanted to have a network. They were on IBMs, they were on Apples, and again, what were little known, the stepchild Ataris, they had them on those as well. And that was a major boost. And what I ended up doing was, I started out with 2 phone lines. I had actually gotten up to 3, and I wanted to get up to 4. I had plans to get up to 4 Atari 800s, each with their own Hayes Smart modem on it, each with their own printer on it, so that I could network them all together. And I was playing around with the front joystick ports, having trigger buttons click on and off, so that one 800 would tell all the other ones that I am sending a chat message to the hard drive. Don't write to the hard drive. So it was my own sort of kludgy, read and write semaphore. But time kind of went by. By '89, I got involved with some other things. It was time to take the bulletin board down. I didn't have time for it anymore, and unfortunately the lights went out on it, and that was the end of the bulletin boards. But I was still frequenting them. They were not as many Atari 8-bit, because you had the 8-bits, you had the Atari 800s and the XEs and the XLs, that particular line of computers, and then you had the STs, which were done from '85 onward. Most of the original Atari owners like myself really didn't like the STs. We didn't like the fact that they were produced by former Commodore executives, and we didn't really like the whole motto and motif that was put by them to the Atari user. We kind of felt like they were sold to us, and the company kind of turned their backs on us. So nobody really was interested in the STs if you owned the original Ataris. But there were the new Atarians, the new owners of these, and these ST bulletin boards came around, and they had multiple serial ports on them, so you could have multi-user BBSs, and they had their own versions. They had Forum ST, which was the Forum. Trying to remember, it was you had a couple different Atari bulletin boards. You had Amos, which was the first one. That was the Atari message information system. You had Carnival, which was a version of Amos. There was a couple of versions of Amos that came out. But one of the real sort of ground up, break away from the existing mold was Forum, and Forum was Friends of Ricky Moose, I think it was, and it wasn't Forum, with a U, it was Forum with an E, and that actually made its migration from the original Atari 800s and XLs and XEs up to the ST line, and that took on many iterations. It actually had a built-in programming language and scripting language, built-in menu editor. It got very fancy after a while. But by that time, I stopped being a sysop. I continued to be a user of Atari, of bulletin boards in general. And then, as time went on, I mean, I was bringing modems into work, and with hopes that I come into work, I'd request a phone line, and I was still visiting bulletin boards at work on the side, with my modem. But as time went by, these things started to fade away. A lot of the Ataris didn't get involved with the FidoNet. They didn't get involved with becoming a node, because that kind of seemed like an IBM only club that really didn't seem like it branched out to a lot of the other platforms. I don't know whether it made it to like the Apple IIs or some of the other platforms, but I know that unfortunately the Ataris didn't get to participate in that, which was sort of a shame. And as time went by, I mean, things kind of like faded down a little bit. I was still using bulletin boards up until about '94, I guess. By then, a lot of the bulletin boards were, what was left of the Atari bulletin boards actually had adopted ANSI. You were using ANSI graphic codes and stuff like that, so they kind of joined the Me Too crowd. And bulletin boards really were kind of getting boring. They were kind of getting cookie cutter. They were starting to get quiet because people were starting to make their migration over to the AOLs and the CompuServe 2000 that was redone. Or I shouldn't say CompuServe 2000, but CompuServe when it was starting to get more internet centric, and you had the Prodigies and you had the Wells and was it Netcom and a lot of the earlier adopters of the web, and people were starting to make their migration, and it was starting to get very quiet. And I noticed people weren't making message entries as often, and like everybody else, I kind of made my way to the web. And occasionally I would try like old bulletin board numbers to see if they were up, see if they were still there, and slowly but surely, one after the other, they all kind of ticked away and faded off. And it's kind of a shame. I ever since you contacted me about this whole BBS video, I went and I pulled out my old discs that I've been kind of clowning around with some of the computers on my workbench, and the thought actually has been kind of crossing my mind of just setting it up just to kind of play with it again and dial into it and just to kind of clown around. So I mean, if anything, I think that's kind of a nice thing, kind of reignite the spirit and want to kind of take a look in the past.
Okay.
Did I babble enough?
Yes. Well, like I said, when I talk to people, I'll go back to center.
No. Get back over there.
Get back over there. Start talking. That's the guy I interviewed yesterday was about 79, and his relationship with the camera was peripheral. So he was talking about stuff that was pretty important.
Well, I figured I'd talk to you. I really don't want to talk into the camera. I want to talk like I'm talking to you.
People have different styles. I'm fine with either. I mean, that's what, if I was doing 8 people, I could set each shot up absolutely perfectly, get them, have a script ahead of me of what I'm going to ask. This is crap. I'm doing 140 people so far. No way. It's whatever they're comfortable with.
Sure.
And I'm interviewing him, but while I'm talking to him, he's literally getting up and holding stuff up at me. And then going back and sitting down again.
Okay. Not realizing, hey, kind of, like, I don't want to turn around and go, hey, listen, I got this over here and this. Yeah. I'm trying to, show stuff to the camera.
Right, and I'll probably aim the camera a little closer and re-ask you a few things, but anyway, but he would just, walk over literally like this and just be like, and there was this thing, and then he'd go back and sit down again. I was like...
Just doesn't quite get it.
I'll use some of that footage. I'm going to ask an extremely stupid question.
Okay.
Which is, do you think of Atari as the best home computer?
Do I think of Atari as the best home computer?
Yeah. By home computer, I mean, when people say car, today they mean some Japanese thing they bought that looks the same as every other one, as opposed to, say, the 20s, which is what we're talking about, when there was like 100 car companies, and there was the Dictator and the Edsel, and and they're all battling. That's what I mean by home computers. The home computer.
Oh, sure. At the given at the time, that was the choice of the choice of the computer. Obviously was. It was sort of biased at the same time because I was playing the Atari arcade games, playing the Atari home games. I owned the Atari video computer system, and everything was so Atari at the time before its sale, before its turnover. When you thought of Atari, you thought of the highest quality, the best games, the best of everything. So it made sense that if they come out with a computer, God, it's got to be the best thing around. And what was kind of interesting is what we take for as a necessity today, graphics, sound, color, back then was kind of laughed at. If you had that kind of capability, it's just a game machine. Not realizing, well, if it's capable of producing 256 colors and 192 by 320 resolution, and it can do 4-octave sound and a couple of different channels, that's a great computer. And admittedly, I always thought the Atari was a great computer. I got involved with the big Commodore, Atari, Flame Wars. I mean, those filled up many a message base, and took up bandwidth on CompuServe and a lot of other online services, because that was always the big thing. It was never Apple, Atari. They always kind of stayed apart from each other, but it was always the Commodore Atari thing. And really, I actually had talked with one of the former Commodore chip designers who had actually worked on a product for Atari at one point, and he admitted to me, he says, we looked at the Atari and we made a cheap version of it. And I guess that kind of always sort of stuck in the craw with Atari users about Commodore. It was like, you came along with your cheap, chintzy, cheapo looking machine, and you're constantly breathing down our backs, giving us trouble. And you got your disk drives that are no faster than our tape drives, and you've got these clunky printers, and your computer looks ugly, and it was this whole flame war. But yeah, I mean, I always thought the Atari was the best computer. I was always admittedly jealous of the Apple IIs because they had all the expansion slots. We only had a couple of expansion slots, and they were really geared more towards memory as opposed to video and a lot of other things that the Apples got to take advantage of. A friend of mine who ran a bulletin board and actually helped me along, gave me a lot of advice, and sparked me on certain areas. He ran a bulletin board, and he had, I think, 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 of these little micro modem. They were like in little smoke brown plastic cases that went into the Apple II, and he was running a multi-user bulletin board on one single Apple, whereas the only way I was able to do it was to have multiple Ataris hooked up to a single data source and have multiple modems. It was all redundant. It really wasn't a multi-user bulletin board. I tried a couple times to do it, and maybe it was because I was running in BASIC and it should have been run in machine language, but I could never get the machine to run fast enough to handle more than one user at a time. 2 users it could go, but it was super slow and super kludgy, super. Bleh, bleh. It was really slow and really super kludgy. There we go.
Now, just to, of course, focus on the negative for a moment, the Atari Commodore Flame Wars, if you want to describe them in more detail, because that's a very, there aren't, well, there is and there isn't, right? But I mean, at the time, it's almost warring tribes.
Oh, it was. It's the same thing. It was sort of the same thing. I don't know. I guess Atari users became sort of a warring faction because there was a big war, big fight with Atari versus Intellivision. That was a big fight between the two video game consoles. I guess it was that sort of Reagan era, us versus them, good guys versus the Reds kind of thing. You grew up in that sort of mentality that there was always something to fight about. There was always we're better than you are. But the Commodore Atari fight was a big thing. I mean, it produced a lot of negative flack, and I mean, really made enemies out of a lot of people. I remember seeing people viciously attacking people nonstop in the message boards. They were people that I would actually follow a guy around and keep an eye on him and keep lashing out at him on multiple bulletin boards. I mean, it got that serious. Going back to the friend that helped me out with one of his his bulletin board that he ran, he got into such a fight with a guy. The guy came in the middle of the night and cut his phone lines off the side of his house. I mean, this ensued into a fight, and they both wound up in jail for a night. I mean, people get really heated. They get very defensive of their computers. It's not like you go and you buy a stereo or you buy a blender or a toaster. A computer is a very personal thing. It's an expression of how you want to work, how you want to do things. It becomes an extension of yourself, and you tend to protect your own. So I guess that's why you saw such a heated battle between that. And if you look today, it's mostly. I mean, this was adults that were really doing this. Now you see this sort of same flame war happening today with kids that, well, my PlayStation's better than your Xbox, better than your GameCube, better than your Dreamcast. There's that whole fight among, video game consoles, and quite frankly, it's gotten to the point today where they're all the same. I mean, they all do a game very well. Maybe, one person's controllers are better than the other, but they're all basically the same. Whereas computers, it was unique, it was different. How much expandability, how much memory, how much this. And this extended off of the bulletin boards, these wars, because you would walk into a store and you would hear some Commodore kid that would see somebody looking at an Atari computer getting ready to buy it, and you go, you don't want that, it's not powerful enough, it can't even run a disk drive, it can't run this. And I remember myself personally stepping up and going, and getting involved in that, and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. We have robotic arms, we have Corvus disk drives, we have this, we have that, we have all these sorts of things. And then you'd see the two people that were kind of looking at the computer to be kind of like, stepping back some way, like, okay, let's get out of here. So it was a really big thing, and it really did consume a lot of bulletin boards. And just like there are today, like websites, there's flame sites, there's hate sites about this, that, and everything. under the sun. There were websites like that that had hate boards, hate message boards, and matchmaker boards, and all sorts of different things to appeal to different people. One of the big things that Atari BBS has had, we had multi-level security for users, and 0 being the sysop, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 9 for users. And what you would get was you would get people that would come on and they would email you and they'd say, listen, hey, I got the latest game, latest pirate game. If you give me higher level into your better downloads, I'll give you this game. And they would upload the game and you'd check it out. And okay, you'd tick them up to, level from level 1 to level 5 or something. And, that would be a big thing. We had a huge, monstrous network of pirate bulletin boards. In fact, it extended right into Atari itself. There were people that worked at Atari. There was one point LucasArts actually came into Atari, and they brought 2 of their latest games. And these games, no one understood how the heck they were programmed because they were doing graphics that no one had seen before. However they apply their insight to making movies, they applied it to programming, and they came up with 2 games. There was one called Ball Blazer, and there was another one called Rescue and Fractalis. And these games were doing graphics and doing the ability to manipulate graphics that no one in the industry had ever seen before. Well, everybody in Atari had a copy. Now this was 2 demo discs that were brought in. They were supposed to be kept someplace, never touched. Well, by the end of the day, they were in the entire company. Everybody was playing at their cubicles. There were messages being sent out through the local Vaxes to everybody's account saying, we hear that these games are being run around. Stop playing them. We are going to lose this deal with this company to sell these games. Well, they of course made their way out into the internet, and people were getting them on their bulletin boards. We were seeing games on our bulletin boards 2, 3, 6 months before they were even out. I found a couple of my discs that actually, some of my file discs where I kept all my download files, and I found stuff like The Last Starfighter for the Atari 800. It was never released, but I've got a copy of it because it was a pirate copy that got out on the internet before the company changed hands and before they decided not to do the licensing agreement with the company, and they never came out with that particular version. I had games like Quasimodo and games, other games that never made it out, or finally made it out, months or years later, that we had games before anybody else, and we were actually, thinking this was great, but we were actually hurting ourselves because game companies were dropping off of making Atari games left and right. Some of the big, game companies that are still around today, like Electronic Arts, they wouldn't touch an Atari with a 10-foot pole after a while because of the pirating. There was, for every 1 game they sold, there was 100 pirate copies out there, and they were running rampant around the bulletin boards. Bulletin boards, what I loved about them, what I loved about going online, especially when I had some friends come over. You have a friend come over who was semi-interested in computers, was curious more than anything else. They would watch you go online, and you were kind of, sort of, letting them look over your shoulder while you gave the secret pass key to get behind that door, and you got into this sort of secret underground world. Nobody really knew about bulletin boards until they sort of made the headlines when, like, the 414 hacker group, they got busted by the FBI for playing around. I mean, here were kids again playing with Commodore 64s and Atari 800s and Coco, TRS-80s and such, and these guys broke into NASA and broke into, a couple of research firms, and it wasn't until they started to hit the newspapers that people suddenly knew what bulletin boards were and realized, mothers and fathers who have been wondering what's Johnny been doing in the middle of the night on his Atari, until 3 o'clock in the morning. He's always typing away. He must be doing some great things on his computer. Yeah, well, he's been on the on the bulletin board lists, going down, calling each one, going on, logging on, downloading the greatest games, playing them, uploading games to other people. It wasn't until that sinister side sort of came out that people started realizing things. I guess the other aspect, another sinister side, was, and this was sort of based on the movie War Games. There was a program, a War Games dialer, and I used it many a day, and thank God the statute of limitations is gone up, so I can talk about this. Used to have a War Games dialer, and it was just like the movie. You would set it up, you would put in the latest MCI 800 number, the Sprint 800 number, whatever it happened to have been, and we'd let it run all night. And what we would do is you would put in the number, you would put in a starting code 00001, and then you would put in a bulletin board that, or CompuServe. You would put in a CompuServe dial-up number because you knew that was never busy. And the whole point of the program was it had to try every code, then get a code, dial the Sprint number, wait whatever seconds, input the Sprint code, and then dial CompuServe. If it got a carrier, boom, that went on your printer the next morning. So you go to sleep, next morning you wake up, you had 2 or 3 Sprint codes, and you had a choice. Either you kept it to yourself, which was the best thing to do because you might have gotten 30 days of good long-distance dialing out of it, or you traded it on a message on a bulletin board to get high-end access to their pirate games. And that code usually within 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, would be dead because by the time you gave it out, 10 people gave it out to 10 more people, gave it out to 100 more people. Before you know it, it was across the entire United States, out into Europe, out into everywhere, out to every single BBS out there. And of course, that set off the red flag with Sprint or MCI or whoever it was, and boom, that code was gone. So, there was the other aspect. I mean, it wasn't just the IBMs and the Apples and everybody. Ataris, we got into everything. We got into the pirating, we got into the phone freaking, we got into hacking. Again, the positive and creative side was, we got into doing all the ASCII animation and graphics. There was another guy I recall who played around experimentally, downloading really super compressed audio, and it would say something on his bulletin board when you came on. Of course, it sounded horrible. You would say hello, and you'd have to maybe try to use your imagination a little bit to really, see that it said, hello. But, we were doing that, and then outside the bulletin board you had Modem Combat and a couple of other head-to-head one-on-one games for playing video games, and then just the discovery that if I set my modem to answer and you set yours to dial, and I set mine to half duplex and you set yours, we could directly dial each other and talk to each other, and there was sort of your primitive instant messaging, talking to each other. I always thought that was kind of neat. When I didn't want my mother to know about a conversation about MCI codes and stuff like that, I didn't want her hearing anything or picking up the phone because at the time my mother and my father were curious. What's Curt up to? Is he getting into trouble? I would dial my friends, and we would directly talk to each other online, one-to-one, and I'd say, okay, here's the latest MCI code, or here's the latest this, that, and the other thing. So this was our own little sort of, hidden, communication method outside, it was outside of, parental, the sphere of parental influence. So, it was things like that.
I want to keep it at this angle. I just like this angle because the whole time you're talking, it says Atari Home Computers behind you.
Oh, okay.
Which automatically brands the conversation. Let's put this on this tape. Another softball, underhanded thing, which is, what is the draw in collecting so much Atari stuff?
What's the draw? I guess everybody sort of has a bug or a seed that's planted in them. You may collect baseball memorabilia, you may collect stamps, you may collect bottle caps, you may collect license plates. Everybody sort of has their own niche. This is my niche. There are wannabes, there are people who think it's cool, it's the cool fad thing to do. I'm going to collect video games, I'm going to collect classic video games, I'm going to collect classic computers. And, it's fun and exciting for all of, maybe 6 months, and then they're like, oh, Johan, this is boring, let me go find something new to play with, and then it winds up on eBay or winds up in the trash, unfortunately. For me, it kind of started out with, again, the transition of the company back in '84, changed hands. And when it changed hands, right before that, there were all these announcements about computers with built-in disk drives, computers with built-in voice synthesizers, talking about Laserdisc players, new video game consoles, all sorts of new things, and everything got canceled. We gotta stop for a second. I need to get a drink of water.
Oh, certainly. Okay.
So one of the things that really motivated me in as far as collecting was there used to be this store in Staten Island Computer Center, and they used to. This was this was the Disneyland for Atari people, because you walked in and they just had like rows and rows of. They had the computer demonstrator, they had the video game version, they had the big storage lockers filled up with software and peripherals, and you just walked in there and, you know, your jaw's on the floor and you're like, ah, you know, you're just kind of, you know, oohing and eyeing at the whole thing. And I used to love going to that store because I just felt so much at home. I always loved Atari. I always loved everything they did. Again, you know, they were doing the greatest video games. They were doing incredible home video games, with the exception of maybe Pac-Man, which was horrifying. It actually is a great game. If maybe they called it something else and they didn't label it Pac-Man, it probably would have done very well. But,
Mr. Dash.
Yeah,
Mr. Dash and his incredibly hard to find enemies.
Yes.
And his paranoid enemies.
His incredible blinking enemies.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything they did was just incredible. And I was looking so forward to 84, the end of 84, because they were talking about new high-end computers, and IBM Compatible was rumored about, and new video game console. I mean, you know, there was the big video game crash, and Atari was picking itself back up, and there was talk about this incredible new video game console they were going to come out with that would have a keyboard to turn into a computer, it had an interface to hook up to a Laserdisc player, all these really neat things. And then I remember one of the Atari geared magazines had a front page on it saying that, you know, unfortunately the company's been sold, we have no status on things, all the products are either on hold or canceled, and I'm like, what's going on? Now, I figured, no problem, I'll wait, you know, I'm sure in a couple months these things will come out, and then finally the announcements came out, everything that was announced has been canceled, we've got all these new things that are coming out, and they were, you know, they were all the new style, they were in these ugly little gray cases, and, you know, they weren't that great. I said, well, I've seen photos, I've seen people do magazine reviews, so obviously people have physically seen these items, they have to exist, I'm going to go find them. So I actually called Atari and pretended to be a third-party company and said, hey, you know, I've been working on the expansion chassis, I need to finish up and deliver it, could you put me through to engineering? And they put me through. And then I get an engineer on the line, I'm like, hi, you know, my name's Curt, I just kind of pretended I was, you know, a third-party company because, you know, I wanted to get to talk to somebody. What's going on with, you know, with this expansion chassis, or what's going on with the new high-end computer? And at first the people were a little reluctant, and they started opening up. They started saying, you know, well, we're under new management, and all that stuff's been canceled. I'm like, well, do you still have it? Is it still around? Yeah, well, you know, there's a couple down the company store. I'm like, can I send you some money? Could you send it to me? And I started building up these relationships with all these people, and they were sending me out stuff, and I was starting to get things, and I would start clipping newspaper articles. I was keeping every single magazine that came out, and I was keeping an archive of that, and at one point in my bulletin board, I dropped the Star Trek theme, and I renamed it. It was called the Earth Access Center, and it became the access center for all of Atari. And I was answering questions, and, you know, at first I thought I was correcting history. I was actually making some of my own mistakes, and it was, you know, a learning process. But I was sort of keeping abreast on the state of Atari, getting things off of, from people I knew inside, getting things off of the Atari bulletin board and posting it there so people in the New York area would know about the latest announcements and stuff like that. I was participating on the CompuServe SIGs, getting information. I would cut and paste the roundtable sessions from there, and I would put it onto my bulletin board, and I was keeping abreast of everything. So I was taking my collecting interest and my interest of keeping abreast of Atari and keeping, you know, as accurate a history of Atari, and I kind of was moving that onto my bulletin board at the same time. When the web, of course, came, you know, that was a far better medium to work with, obviously, because I could put photos and stuff up, and, you know, that kind of took my bulletin board, which had gone down in '89, and then finally in like 94, 95-ish or so, I put up a cheesy little one-page AOL web page, and that was my rebirth, you know, the whole idea of talking about Atari and evangelizing it, and, you know, keeping everybody abreast and the whole thing. That whole thing sort of started again. But kind of going back to the collecting thing, was that I realized that this stuff is going to wind up in the trash. This stuff is going to be thrown away. So as time went by, either by my connections or by me flying out and literally running around, rummaging around in the garbage, I was pulling out stuff. Stuff was getting thrown away. Books, engineering logs, photos, schematics, actual hardware, one-of-a-kind pieces. This stuff was being thrown away, or it had been put in its company store to be sold off to anybody who would have tinkered around with it and probably thrown away too. So what I ended up doing was I ended up becoming sort of the unofficial custodian of Atari's throwaways, and then I was having, every 3 months, every couple of months, I was having conference calls with a lot of former Atari people, and we started kidding around. We started talking about things. We're like, we've become the Atari Historical Society. We're all the historians here remembering Atari, and Curt's the official curator of the the museum, and that kind of launched that. I kind of became the Atari Historical Society curator and sort of the central focus, and all the various former employees and people that had any dealings with Atari, anybody who may have retained equipment, or maybe their father or their mother worked at the company and they found a box of some stuff down in the basement. Everybody was suddenly contacting me and saying, Curt, I've got this stuff, what is it, and should I keep it, should I throw it away, should I sell it, or do you want to buy it, or will you pay just for the shipping? And as time went by, I mean, just the amount of paperwork alone has just been absolutely staggering. Handwritten notes by like Ray Kassar and other CEOs of the company itself, that as time went by, and vice presidents and presidents, and photographs of openings of like the Taiwan plant and various other locations. This has all kind of come together, and it's been saved. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, unfortunately. A lot of them are very jealous collectors who have gone out of their way to sort of do this counter campaign against my attempt to save all this stuff, because I interfere with them greedily being able to go sit up in their attic and and hold their prized possessions. I'm trying to present things out into the public. I'm trying to let people see the real Atari. I actually have stuff that's out on tour in Europe right now. I've got a computer space that's making its rounds in the United Kingdom, and it's heading over to Europe. I've got equipment on loan to some companies out in Germany and Holland. In California, there are people who've got things on loan. There is actually a historical interest in Atari. What a lot of people don't seem to realize is they did a heck of a lot more than video games. They invented a lot of technologies that were built upon and are used in computers today. A lot of their patents have been applied and reapplied into newer technologies that are being used today. Their employees are seated throughout the entire industry, from Microsoft to IBM to Novell to whatever. They are out there. These people have taken a lot of the designs that they did 10, 20, 25 years ago, and they are either maturing them, reapplying them again. Like I say, the interface that's on the side of this computer is a very, very primitive version of what became the Universal Serial Bus today. You've got a single port that can accept disk drives, accept serial drives, accept printers, accept literally any type of peripheral. What is that today? That is the Universal Serial Bus. And the funny thing is that one of the patent holders is actually the designer of that port. So you see that that people have gone out from the company and have seeded new technologies, or have taken original ideas and have matured them, and they're able to see their realization, because maybe 10, 20 years ago this wasn't conceivable, or it was conceivable but it was so slow and so kludgy that, well, we were able to prove that it can be done, but there's no applicable way of putting this in the real world today. Well, 20 years later, you've got processors, and you've got technology, and you've got form factors that make the dream a complete reality today, and that's what you're seeing a lot of these guys go back and do. So
the Atari, well, I'd go into the pure sociological event of there being warring Atari collectors is fascinating, but absolutely outside the area of this this documentary. As much as I think it's really cool, it's
there's a bunch of real assholes, real pricks.
Well, it's funny because it's just a straight. I mean, but the thing is also, see, you're one of the players. I'm saying just even slightly from the outside, it's just the most fascinating thing. Right? I mean, well,
it's again, it goes back to like you were saying, like about bulletin board software. You've got guys that are fighting over and getting into legal battles over, software that's like 25 years old, 20 years old, that nobody's going to use anymore, but they want to make sure that they've got their, their mark in history, or, that, if somebody comes back, in 10 more years and says, hey, who wrote, BBS X, they can say, hey, well, that was, John Smith. He still owns an original copy, he still owns the patent to it, the trademark, and everything. And in fact, he still has on one of his 19-inch racks over there, he's got a server. Nobody calls it, or maybe he gets 2 calls a year, but it's up, it's running, it's still live,
The group that I've had to deal with are the guys who spent, I found it was, the going rate was $10,000, but they spent about $10,000 for the rights to a certain kind of bulletin board system program.
So I ended up just taking Amos, and I just kept rewriting it until finally I actually renamed it. Originally, it was Amos, and it was mostly Carnival. Carnival was the one I used mostly, but then I went back to Amos and took chunks of it. Like they had come out with a version of Amos that had X modem, Y modem, and Z modem in it. And what I ended up having to do was, I couldn't fit the whole bulletin board program into memory. I ended up getting a new version of BASIC called BASIC XL, and I was using DOS XL, which was written by the same company, specifically optimized for that particular language. And it had a neat feature in it, which you could do, what's called enter. And what you could do was, in a certain part of a program, when you needed, say, the Z modem module, you would enter zmodem.bbs, and what it would do is it would overwrite. I ended up taking a section of code, like, I don't know, from 5,000 to 6,000, and that became a loading area. So what I would do was, if I needed, someone wanted to run zmodem, I would say enter zmodem.bbs, and it would load that particular chunk of code from the RAM disk into working memory, and it would overwrite lines 6,000 through 7,000, and it would run the program. And then when someone wanted to run xmodem, well, it would go back and get xmodem.bbs and overwrite 5,000 through 6,000 again, or whatever area it was, and it would overwrite and put the xmodem module there. So what I was trying to do was I was trying to create sort of pseudo bank loading, memory banking in my program, so that I could just keep writing over. And I think, like Forum, they ended up doing something like that, where they just had a core shell running, and when you wanted to do something, it would just load in that module, run just that module, take it out of memory, and then load back in like the main menu module. So I think someone took it to the extreme, but that was one of the ways to fight the 64K constraint. I mean, that, every little last ounce of memory that you could get out of the machine was so vital. I mean, the maximum really on the 800 was 48K, but there was actually 4K hiding behind the operating system, and if you did the right things with the right DOS, you could have the DOS load in a different spot, and then suddenly, boom, you had 52K. And I was like, wow, this is great. And then, I don't know what this was, there was some kind of hidden feature in my 80 column card. It ran its own memory, and it ran its own character set. For whatever reason, when you ran it in 80 column mode, it freed up another 2K of memory. So suddenly I had 54K. I was cranking. I had so much memory, it wasn't even funny. It just opened up the door when suddenly I had this extra like 6K to play with. It was fantastic. And then, suddenly down the road, I filled up that memory, and I started messing around with, loading in chunks in a specific, area of lines. And, I got up to where the code was completely rewritten. I rewrote the interface. I had it look just like CompuServe. Because I loved CompuServe. I was like, I worshipped CompuServe, because I was like, it's so big, it's so massive, we're these little one computers, but they're, hundreds and thousands of computers all over the world, and they're just, this monster, company. And I made at one point I took my bulletin board, and I had, instead of like CIS, main, I used to have up in the corner, I had, what was it, Star Trek BBS, so I had like, SBBS main up in the top corner for the page name, and, I had the whole menu, and you would type, go games, go this, go there, and it was taking you through the different menus. So I was, by the end, I had actually rewritten my entire bulletin board to look, CompuServe centric, and that was right up to the end. I think I just loaded up before. I loaded up like my last version, I think, which was, I renamed the software Star Trek BBS software, and it was now up to like 9.7 XL. So I got up to this like obnoxious, rev level. I just, every time I made a change, a major change, it got up to, like, .7 to .8 to .9, and then, never made up to 10 though. the bulletin board went down by then.
Do you think that it's bad to phrase it as a lost art, because the art exists, except for now it's in a completely different area. The guys who are doing these little micro drives or little tiny things, they're doing that kind of gripping code, and it's wrong to say, oh, that art is lost. It just moved to a different country and a different group of guys who are working on it. But having been involved in that arcane art of working within an extremely small space and being constricted, do you think that's given you skills that the other...
Oh yes, yeah. I definitely, I look at running the bulletin board as a major contributor to my skill set, because I learned all the line levels and all of the pins and everything for RS-232. I got a very in-depth understanding of hardware, and definitely really understanding the value of coding space, and going back over and over again, and resharing value, variables, and resharing memory space, and trying to optimize access to a disk drive or to an interface, or just really getting in depth with like the Hayes Smart, the Hayes AT command set. It really is. It's a lost art, and it's also a very respectable art, because of the fact that today, again, like a website. You can go into Front Page, or you can go into Netscape Composer, and it's just a matter of cut, paste, boom, boom, boom. You don't even have to write HTML anymore. I mean, you can just slap everything together, and you're done. That's not programming. That's just well, that's an argument in itself, because you could say that's object-oriented programming, because was that whole idea of being able to take an object code and slap it in, and that the computer does all the work for you. But to actually sit down and write in BASIC, and write in JavaScript, and write in machine language, that's an art, and it's true. It's people have gotten very lazy, especially here in the States. When I see really well written code for like PIC processors and BASIC stamps, and a lot of those little processors that don't have necessarily as much code as a regular computer would have, enough memory space, or space is constrained, because you want to build something that's small, and you don't want to have a big memory board. You see a lot of that really tight, really well done code. You see people really staying up all night and contributing to message threads, and posting information up on their website that's strictly technical. You see more of that, like in the Eastern European countries. These people really seem to go out of their way, and really seem to respect that art form of writing tight, well optimized code that fits in a very limited form factor, and does a very specific thing. And you look at today. I mean, the big bloatware argument, and it's true. You got to go run out and buy a 2 gigahertz machine with 256 or 512 megs of memory and a 40 gig or 120 gig hard drive, because you can't do anything anymore without it. Even a common user now, with digital cameras and video and stuff like that, they're filling up their hard drives left and right, and they're finding that loading Kazaa, and loading memory temp, weather temp, and these 10,000 other little garbage applets down at the bottom of their screen before their computer finally loads up. They've already chewed up 128 megs of their memory with all this little crap they've got in the corner. And this is the common layman. This is the housewife. This is the 12-year-old girl, with her girlfriends, going on to go chat with their friend or their boyfriend online. It's a different mentality today, because when bulletin boards are being run, this was a geek world. This was total geek centric. You very rarely found a layman, a common person, on the bulletin boards. You really didn't see that. You were a home computer user that knew how to mess around and hack a little bit with your hardware, and you really had to get a tolerance for the hardware, because you knew that it would fail, or you'd have a problem, or maybe you had to turn the computer off, you had to reboot. This was common practice, because you knew and you understood that the hardware had a lot of limitations to it. It was a little flaky, was a little buggy, the software was a little flaky, a little buggy, and that was common acceptance. And if you weren't more of a technical person, you really weren't seen on the bulletin boards. You really weren't seen out there. So it was kind of this nice little sort of underground geekdom of everybody, communicating with each other and sharing stuff. And you had the pirates, and you had the hackers, and you had the freakers. And we were all sort of sitting under the radar. Even, we didn't even really know about the internet that much. I mean, the internet's going on in the background, the ARPANET, and that's building and growing and doing what it's doing. And we're kind of here on our own. We were sort of our own little sort of sub-layer in the layer of what is the advent of technology and communication. We were that one band in the layer there of communication between computer users, and it was the world of the geek. And even CompuServe, even the Source, and then later on Quantum, which became AOL, and went on for other things. This was still more geekdom. It wasn't until like the internet, when you could go on and go to UPS.com and whatever else. You could do your shopping at Sears and Lowe's and whatever else. It wasn't until you really started to see a lot of common things that appealed to common people that you saw the housewife and the schoolgirls and their girlfriends, the non-technical people using the communications medium and using computers. And of course, like I say, you've gotten to the point where computers are like people's cars and closets. They're cluttered with junk. This woman likes to have 10,000 stuffed dolls in her car. Well, guess what? Her desktop is flowers and dolls, and she's got 10,000 little junk applets at the bottom corner of her computer that she thought were cute and downloaded and are on her machine now, and it's bogging it down and slowing it down because nobody really knows any better. You or a technical person knows. Let's keep it lean and mean. We got work to do. Common person now is turning their computers into into their own personal expression, their own fashion statement, both on the screen and the environment. And even little stickers on the computers now. I mean, when you start to see Toys R Us selling Barbie computers and Mattel Hot Wheel computers, they've been accepted to the social masses.
Right. Okay, that's this tape. Excellent. Here, step away from that. I want to get a little bit of that alone on footage. Just a couple milliseconds of it. Oh yeah, that's all I needed. But it's this is an impressive looking.
It's nice. It's a nice centerpiece.